But we're going to talk about Medicaid. And just a quick reminder, Medicaid is that financial assistance in a nursing home, some limited at-home care as well, and also some help with medication costs. We know that we don't confuse it with Medicare, right? Medicare is that short-term stay in a hospital and then some rehab. Medicaid's for the long-term care costs. Medicaid has very strict income and asset rules. Particularly in Virginia, the asset rules can be very complicated. So we're going to spend some time now talking about those. You know, how do we meet those asset limits? So like the VA, Medicaid has a limit. They say if you have more than a certain amount of money, you can't qualify yet. We're going to talk about what that limit is. But we also need to understand what is an asset. What do they count? Well, it's actually a shorter conversation if I tell you what they don't count, what they exempt. So the good news is they'll exempt your home so long as one of the owners is still living in it. So what that means usually is husband and wife, both of their names are on the deed. Say the husband goes into a nursing home, so long as the wife is still at home, the house is exempt. All right? They'll also exempt, yes ma'am?
But her name has to be on the...
She has to be a legal owner of the property.
Otherwise?
Well, otherwise we'd do some planning and we'd fix it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so, you know, again, never despair. Always ask, you know, what can still be done. But the idea would be to have that done ahead of time. Yes, ma'am?
But are you required to still live in that house? Can you sell it?
You can sell it under certain circumstances. There's timing that's important, and there's circumstances that are important. And so we're going to get to kind of how some of that works, what you can do and when. Here's the thing about Medicaid rules. Medicaid manual is, I don't know, that thick, right? This much is rules, and then this much is like the fine print to all those rules. And this is why we have jobs. I mean, this is why we do what we do, to help people navigate exactly that. So, you know, there's no simple, yes, absolutely you can, no, you can't, usually. There's, yeah, you probably can, but here's how. Yeah, yes, ma'am?
What happens if you put your house in your child's name?
Well, it's going to depend on when you did it, and I'm going to talk about how that works in a minute. Yeah, yes, ma'am?
What if the house is in a trust?
If the house is in a trust, depends on the kind of trust, and it also depends on when it was put there. So, again, I'm going to talk about general rules right now. So the house is exempt under those circumstances I said. One car is exempt. Prepaid funeral doesn't get counted, also exempt. Right? Some limited amounts of life insurance, and then also your personal items. Jewelry, clothing, things in the home. They count everything else. Second home, second car, anything in the bank, anything saved for retirement. There's even a question, do you have any money at home? Right? Do you keep emergency money in a safe at home? Technically, you have to require, you know, not technically, you have to, you know, disclose that as well. Sorry?
Who's going to tell them?
Who's going to tell them? I don't know, but when you sign it, it's fraudulent. So I'm telling you, you need to tell them. Yeah. Because here's the good news. When Simon's talking about pre-planning, we're going to talk about ways to do it legally, to do it ethically. Okay. So how does this work? Let's say we have a single gentleman named Mr. Jones. 10 years ago, Mr. Jones sold his home at the top of the market. He's a widower. And he's got a daughter who helps him out. So he's moved into independent living, and then his daughter's coming in to help. And as he goes along, well, he's got to hire a caregiver. And then maybe he goes into assisted living. Again, daughter's helping. Higher level of care in assisted living. And now it's been 10 years, and he really needs care around the clock. And his daughter and they've said, yes, we found a nice nursing home. You're going to move there. And so he says, okay, but my income's never going to pay that $8,000 a month. I'm going to go down to Albemarle County, meet a couple of the fantastic eligibility workers there, and say, hi, I'm Mr. Jones. Look, I'm moving to a nursing home. I filled out your Medicaid application. You asked, so I said, you know, I have $100,000 left, but I don't have income to pay for this. So can I apply for Medicaid, please? They say, Mr. Jones, it's so nice to meet you. We'd be happy to help you. The problem is you have too much money. So you're going to have to spend some of that down, and then you can come back and apply. Right? They give him the application back. He says, well, spend it down. I mean, by how much? Come back and see us when you have $2,000 left. Okay? I have to spend $98,000. Well, I've got a daughter. I've got a checkbook. Let me write her a check for $98,000. We'll wait for that to clear. I'll come back and, right, people are shaking their heads at me. No, you can't just give it away, right? That's what I was saying with the look-back period. So how are we going to get from $100,000 down to $2,000 legally. How are we going to do it without incurring a penalty, without hurting his eligibility later? Well, we're going to talk now about Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. And we're going to use them to answer exactly these questions that I just asked. So Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, let's say this. Let's say Mr. Johnson, he's going to go into the nursing home. And Mrs. Johnson, she's going to stay in the house. All right, quick review. Both of their names are on the deed. Mr. Johnson goes to a nursing home. Mrs. Johnson stays home. If they apply for Medicaid, the home is? Exempt. Excellent. Good. Home is exempt. Her car is exempt. Okay. What about everything else? Well, they're going to start counting it up. To do this application, they're going to start counting up all their other assets. Now, it doesn't matter. Of course, they're going to count up anything that's in his name. Anything in joint name, of course. For this part of it, they're actually also going to count up everything in her name. Right? Medicaid in Virginia, it doesn't matter whose name it's in. It all gets counted at this initial stage. Let's say they add everything up. They've got $226,000 in countable assets. Okay? Now, there's something that's either called the Spousal Anti-Impoverishment Act or the Anti-Spousal Impoverishment Act. But the point is, there's a law that says, look, you can't make them spend all of that down to $2,000, right? You have to leave something for the spouse at home, the well spouse, the community spouse is what we call it. So in this case, they're pretty much going to split it right down the middle. And we'll say, all right, Mrs. Johnson, we're going to immediately save you $113,000, all right? And that's what's called a Community Spouse Resource Allowance, CSRA. There's actually a glossary of terms in your packets too. So if I say something and you didn't quite catch it, or you want to refer back to it later, you can always look in there as well. Anyway, that's what's called our Community Spouse Resource Allowance. Now, Mr. Johnson also assigned $113,000. He has to get down, though, to $2,000. So how are we going to spend that $111,000 legally in such a way that's not going to kick him off of benefits? Well, he's got a daughter. Can he write the $109,000 check, the $111,000 check, wait for it to clear and then apply? No, still the same rules, right? Can't just give money away. So what's he going to do? Well, he's in a nursing home, right? So on the first of every month, what does the nursing home send? Sends a bill. And Medicaid application takes at least 45, more likely up to around 90 days, right, to get started. So during that time, 1, 2, 3 bills are going to come. And sure, you could pay the nursing home during that time, and that'll take some of this off. Now, depending on the circumstances, there may be ways to get some of that back that you've paid in the meantime. But that's not a very efficient way of spending down, and certainly that's not a way of protecting the assets, right? So if we're trying to figure out how to protect them, well, let's look at how to do that. And I want you to see how this really interacts with the idea of exempt assets that we've been talking about. So, how are we going to spend this money in such a way that they're going to get maximum value out of it? Well, remember that I said that prepaid funerals are exempt? If they don't have prepaid funeral plans, now's the time to get them. He can spend this money on prepaid funeral plans for both of them. And then that's money that otherwise would have just been spent down at the nursing home, that they're going to need to spend money on anyway, or their kids are. Someone's going to end up paying for that. So they might as well use this money for that and keep the value of those assets. And again, they could do it for both of them. What about the home? She's keeping the home. The home's exempt for now. What if the home needs a new roof or new siding? Or if she's going to stay there long term, maybe they need to do some work. Put in a ramp to get up the front stoop, make it easier with the bathroom so you don't have to step over the tub, do the kind of walk-in shower type thing, right? Make improvements to the home so that she can stay there more long term. So we can fix up the home. And that's adding to the value of an exempt asset. So it's increasing the amount of exempted asset. Similarly, I said she has a car, right? I didn't mention, though, the car's from the 90s. The car has 175,000 miles on it. It's making those grinding sounds. It's more rust than paint, and you get the idea. And she's going back and forth to the nursing home, visiting her husband. And now what are they worried about? Car's going to break down, let alone the payments, right? Car breaks down. So what are we going to do? Get a new car, right? Something a little bit more reliable, something they don't need to worry about every single night.
Sorry. What if your car is not in bad shape and you just want a new car?
That's fine too.
It is.
Yeah, but you can't have two of them. You only get one that's exempt. But yeah, but a great way, because what you're going to do is, that gives you more time before you'd ever need to purchase a new car in the future, right? Again, you're just increasing the value of the exempt asset.
So Medicaid doesn't look at that as an extravagant.
Well, here's what I'd say. We have the idea, there's this idea, and in the newspaper, some person once said, oh, you have all these people on Medicaid driving Mercedes. I do this literally every day of my life. I've never met that person, okay? There's no one's out there trying to say, oh, well, I won't say no one. I've yet to meet the person who's out there saying, hey, this is a great opportunity for me to really cash in on something. Because as we're going to keep talking about, there's better and other ways to save this money because, what's the thing about a car? You drive it off the lot and immediately it's worth less, right? If we're trying to make sure that there's money for Mrs. Johnson at home, probably spending it on an extravagant car is not a great use of it. Yeah.
Whose name should that car be in?
Her name.
Her name.
Her name. Mm-hmm.
And he can still take it off his hat.
Yeah, you can use his money to spend it for her car, because only she's the one who's allowed to keep a car. If he had a car, it would get sold and all this. Yes, sir.
So these are all calculations that you're making in the process of applying for Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. We'd actually be doing this. Yeah, and so some of it is before applying, some of it is after applying. Yeah. So this is not something that no one should go home and say, hey, I'm going to go do all this. This is only in the context of a Medicaid application in a crisis plan, and I would recommend under the guidance of an experienced attorney. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Can you prepay your nursing home expenses, like say a year's worth?
You can. So can you prepay nursing home expenses? It really depends. For a lot of places, they're actually going to then count that as an asset. But it's what is it that you're doing? If you're trying to avoid having to pay the nursing home expenses, if you've already paid it, that's not really saving it, but it is getting it out of your pocket.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. You're going to get the care because you've paid for it. Medicaid's not going to pay too because they're going to count the money that you've given them. Yeah. And finally, you can pay off debts. If there's a mortgage on the home, if there's a little bit of credit card debt, if you borrowed money from someone to make improvements on the home, pay that off now. And that does two things. Again, it increases the amount of equity in the home. But maybe more importantly, Mr. Johnson, some of Mr. Johnson's income is going to end up going to the nursing home as a copayment. So what paying off the house or the car is going to do is actually eliminate payments that Mrs. Johnson's going to have to make, right? It's going to eliminate money that she's going to have to pay because she's going to have decreased income. Okay. So between the funeral plans, fixing up the home, a new car maybe, paying off debt, that could very well get him down to the $2,000. But plenty of people come to me and they say, well, but hang on, Ari, we've never carried debt. We paid for our last two houses, out of pocket. We don't need a new car. The one we have is fine. We just bought it. It's very reliable. That just doesn't seem like a good thing to spend money on to us. The home's in great shape. We thought we were going to sell it. And we've had funeral plans, since I retired 30 years ago. So what now? We could all go to the nursing home, sure. But there's also something that's called a Medicaid-compliant immediate annuity. All right, Medicaid-compliant immediate annuity. Sometimes it's called a SPIA, a single premium immediate annuity. And what a Medicaid-compliant immediate annuity is actually what it sounds like. Medicaid-compliant, it's allowed under the rules to immediately get him from $113,000 or $119,000 all the way down to $2,000. You can use the whole spend down on it. And what it does, you pay money to the annuity company, and then they're going to figure out payments to Mrs. Johnson based on her life expectancy. So they'll say, okay, let's say she's got a 10-year life expectancy. $111,000 divided by 10 years, divided by 12 months to get a monthly figure. In this case, that's $925 a month of income for her. And again, this is going to be important because his Social Security could well go, probably will go to the nursing home as a copayment. So this is income replacement for her. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a cap on the amount of money that Medicaid will offer to determine which nursing home you can go into?
No, that's a great question. Is there a cap that Medicaid will offer to determine which nursing home you can go to? Well, it's really yes and no. It's the same amount of money that they're going to pay wherever you go, and any nursing home has to accept, in order to be licensed, has to accept the Medicaid rate. So in Virginia, it's a little under $6,000 a month that Medicaid will pay. That's actually not that different from $7,000, even $8,000 a month private pay. Some states, the difference can be many thousands of dollars.
But not all nursing homes accept it.
They do. All nursing homes have to accept Medicaid. Now, whether they will accept someone from outside, from the community straight in on Medicaid depends on whether they have an available bed. But if you go in as private pay, and then you run out of money or you do planning and you apply for Medicaid from there, they can't kick you out because you switched over to Medicaid. Everyone has to accommodate you no matter what the pay source is.
Really?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that everywhere?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Do we need to make a distinction between nursing home versus an assisted living?
Yes, we do. Yes, do we need to make a distinction between assisted living and a nursing home? Yes. Medicaid is only for long-term nursing care. Right, that's what we're talking about in this.
Our Lady of Peace, for example, is not considered a nursing home.
Well, Our Lady of Peace does have a center that does have a nursing home. So there's assisted living level, and then if you're in the assisted living level at Our Lady of Peace, my understanding is that you can actually get into their nursing home later if you need it. And they absolutely accept Medicaid down the road.
But we're talking about strictly the nursing home portion.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
And are we talking about in a nursing home, if 24-hour nursing care is able to be accommodated in the home, it's not covered?
Great question, and this one's kind of complicated. So the question was, we're talking in a nursing home, not 24-hour care at home. Actually, if you need 24-hour care at home, you can apply for Medicaid. The problem is there's a limited number of slots, of waiver slots is what they call them. So there has to be availability at the county that, yes, we have an open slot, you can apply for it and get the care at home. And it really only pays, a certain number of dollars per hour for a limited number of hours per week. So it's not the same amount of care, exactly. Now, okay, last question and then I'm going to go on. Yes?
Where do you get the annuities from?
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Where do we get the annuities? You have to work with someone who knows what they're talking about. There are probably 10,000 kinds of annuities out there. One kind is Medicaid-compliant, okay? So if you have a financial advisor you like, you ask them about it, and they say, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. No, we need to find somebody else, right? This is the kind of thing, we're happy to help you get in touch with people who understand how these things work. Because if you do them wrong, these kinds of annuities could be counted as a gift, as a transfer, and then there could be a penalty, and you can't get the money back because the annuity refuses to give it back. I'm going to go forward a little bit now, okay? All right, thank you. But if you hold it, if you write it down, I promise we'll get to it. All right. Since that's all so straightforward, things changed, right? 2005, 2006, Congress passed what's called the Deficit Reduction Act, and it made some changes. The Deficit Reduction Act. Mm-hmm. The way it used to work was, first of all, there was only a 3-year penalty period, right? 3-year look-back period. Now there's a 5-year. And the look-back period, again, means there's actually a question on the application. Have you, in the last 5 years, transferred anything not for value, right? Given anything away? Have you done that in the last 5 years? And then the reason they ask is because if you say yes, then they're going to assess a penalty going forward. The penalty is you don't get Medicaid for a certain number of months based on how much money you gave away. So here's how that worked. Under the old rules in 2013, under the old rules in 2005 or 2004, let's say I gave money away, last year. Let's say I gave my sister $100,000 to help her buy a house. And then, I'm not expecting to need Medicaid or anything. 2 years later, I have a catastrophic accident of some kind. I need nursing care for the rest of my life. They say, Mr. Sommer, again, old rules, have you given anything away in the last 3 years? I say, yes, 2 years ago I gave money to my sister. They say, well, we're very sorry, but you're not going to qualify for Medicaid because there's a penalty. But you only have to wait 1 more year because the penalty and the look-back period were all kind of the same thing, right? Go back to 2014. You've already lived through 2 years. You applied, and then only 1 more year to wait. I know that was confusing, but it doesn't matter because those are the old rules. The new rules are actually much more strict because now it's not just when you gave the money away, but if you apply before 5 years is up, if you apply for Medicaid, then it's not how much time has already gone by, it's how much time into the future are they going to actually disqualify you. So let's say, same story, 2014, I gave $100,000 to my sister. I get through 3 years, 2017, I have a catastrophic accident, I apply for Medicaid. Mr. Sommer, have you given anything away in the last 5 years? Yes, and 3 years ago I gave money to my sister. Well, we're sorry, but you're not going to qualify, and we're going to start the penalty running now. So it can be up to a further 5 years from when I apply. So this is why we call it look back and look forward, right? They'll look back up to 5 years to see whether you've given anything away, and they can apply a penalty up to 5 years into the future. All right. Also, they changed what counted as a transfer. It used to be, if I gave money away because I was trying to help my sister, and then out of the blue I needed Medicaid in the future, they'd say, okay, well, you weren't giving the money away in order to get onto Medicaid. That's an innocent transfer. We're not going to count it. You can still get on. Now they don't care what the reason was. So they say even an innocent transfer can still cause this penalty. Within the 5 years. Yes, ma'am.
Instead of giving the money away, what if you determine that you're loaning the person the money and have an intended payback eventually?
So it's a great question. What if it's a loan, actually? What if you're not giving the money away? Well, so long as it's a loan and they make payments and there's several rules for what a loan actually is, and you have a promissory note and all of that, that's okay, but they actually have to make the payments. It can't just be, oh, it's a loan, and one day I'll get it back. That doesn't work. Yeah. So what is a transfer? A transfer can be a simple gift of money or investments, right? That's, I gave my sister $100,000, I just give it away. Or I add someone else's name to my real estate title, maybe. So, don't worry. So, for example, my grandmother, after my grandfather died, the real estate title was just in her name. She added my mother to the title. And so that's actually a gift, for Medicaid purposes, of 50% of the value of the home. Because she gave my mom half the value of the home by adding her name to the real estate title. Okay? So that would be a transfer with a 5-year look back. Same thing with forgiving a debt. Let's say you had a real debt like we were talking about, right? I loaned my sister $100,000. She's been making payments for 3 years. And then I say, you know what, Molly? Forget about it. You guys need the payments more than I do right now. We'll cancel the debt. Cancel the promissory note. And then if I need to apply for Medicaid, well, that was a transfer of whatever the value of the remaining debt was. But the one that really gets people most frequently, and the one that we see most frequently, is selling something for less than it's worth. And I don't mean, you put your house on the market for $200,000, you sell it for $195,000 because that's the deal you come to. The way it always happens is this. Grandpa can't drive anymore, shouldn't drive anymore, and the family has convinced him, okay, you're not going to, and he says, okay. But his car's in great shape. It's worth $20,000. And the grandson graduates college with a good job, but no way to get to work, and he's only saved $1,000. And no one is comfortable with him purchasing a car that's only worth $1,000 because that's not going to be a safe car. So grandfather says, hey, grandson, I'll sell you my car for $1,000. Everyone feels good about it, but if he applies for Medicaid, that's a transfer of $19,000, right? The difference between the value of the car and what was actually paid for it.
What if the car was in his license?
The car was in it still, so the unit of the couple doesn't matter. So, if he needs to keep it, he can transfer it to his wife under certain circumstances. But again, that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of the rules. Yeah. So what we're going to talk about now, again, all this is crisis planning. What we've been talking about is, in a crisis, what can I do? And the biggest thing I hope you take away from this is, you don't listen to anyone who says, well, someone's already in a nursing home, there's nothing to do. We actually had a client who was told, her husband was in a nursing home for 10 years or more, and she was told by 2 different nursing home administrators at 2 different times, well, he's already in the nursing home, there's nothing to do. She spent well over $1 million over the course of time he was in the nursing home before she came to us and we helped her do a crisis plan and save a good amount of money. All right? And what we see is that for a single person, we can usually save between 40 and 60% of the assets. For a married couple, we can usually save 90 to 100% of the assets in one way or another. So it's very important to always ask. But again, this was all pretty complicated, right? Everything that Simon's going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so is actually a lot more straightforward because you're planning ahead. So we're going to go. I'm going to hand this back to Simon. Thank you very much for your attention and questions. And of course, we're going to stick around for further questions at the end of today.